The storm had rolled in without warning. The wind howled through the canyons like a ghost from another time, rattling the windows of Jack Rayner's isolated cabin. He stood on his porch, weathered hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug, steam rising from the coffee as his eyes scanned the horizon. The desert beyond stretched endless and gray, swallowed by thick clouds that rolled low and heavy across the sky. Thunder cracked in the distance, its echo rumbling through the earth beneath his boots. Jack didn't startle. Storms were common here in the high Nevada desert. What wasn't common, what made him stiffen, set the mug down, and squint into the gathering darkness, was the sound that followed. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't wind. It was a cry. High, clear, and threaded with something not of this world. Pain? Desperation? Jack couldn't tell. But it stopped him cold. He stepped off the porch, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth as the first drops of rain began to fall. The cry came again, distant but distinct. He knew that sound. A wild Mustang, maybe injured. He hadn't seen one this close to his property in years. They usually stuck to the canyons to the south, wary of people. He grabbed his coat, shrugged it on, and started toward the hills. The storm quickened its pace, wind slapping rain against his face as he climbed the ridge. His breath came harder with every step, but still he pushed on, heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in a long time, urgency. A purpose he hadn't expected to find again. He crested the ridge just in time to see it, a dark shape silhouetted against the lightning-streaked sky. A Mustang, standing perfectly still atop a red rock ledge, mane whipping like a banner in the wind. Jack stopped. The horse didn't run. That alone was strange. Wild horses didn't wait. They didn't stand and stare. But this one did, large, proud, and wild-eyed. It met Jack's gaze across the distance, not with fear, but with urgency. It pawed at the ground, snorted, then turned, trotting a few steps before stopping again and looking back. Jack frowned. What the hell? Another flash of lightning illuminated the stallion's frame, sleek but scarred, a survivor. Jack took a tentative step forward. The stallion nickered low and turned again, this time moving with purpose into the gathering storm. Something inside Jack stirred. He could have turned back. The rain was falling harder now, the wind biting through his coat. But he didn't. He followed. Down the slope, through thickets of sage and twisted juniper, the stallion kept just ahead of him, never quite out of sight. Jack's breath was loud in his ears. His legs ached from the strain, but the horse never slowed. It was leading him somewhere. He knew it now, as sure as he knew his own name. Emily would have followed too. The thought came unbidden, sharp as a knife. Emily, with her laugh like sunlight and her endless belief that even wild things could be saved. She'd died chasing that belief, trampled in a panicked herd during a rescue gone wrong. Jack had buried her under the cottonwood by the creek and sealed himself off from the world. That had been 3 years ago. Since then, he hadn't ridden. He hadn't rescued. He hadn't cared. Until tonight. The Mustang disappeared around a bend in the canyon wall. Jack scrambled down a slick path, hands scraping against rock. The wind funneled through the narrow space like a living thing, moaning and shrieking. His coat was soaked through, and his fingers were numb. Then he saw them. The stallion stood still again, body blocking something on the ground. Jack stepped closer, slowly, hands up, trying not to spook him. The stallion snorted but didn't move. Jack crouched, heart hammering. A mare. She lay crumpled on her side, legs trembling, flanks heaving with shallow breaths. Her coat, once a rich sorrel, was matted with mud and blood. Her eyes were dull, half-lidded, but she blinked as he approached. Jack's breath caught. Pregnant. He could see it now, the distended belly, the way she strained with every breath. She was in labor, or trying to be, but something was wrong. She wasn't moving. She couldn't. The stallion stepped closer, lowered his head, and gently nudged her neck. She didn't respond. He let out a low, broken whinny that twisted something deep in Jack's chest. Jack knelt beside her, pressing a hand to her flank. Cold. Too cold. I don't know if I can help, he murmured, voice cracking with disuse and emotion. But I'll try. He looked up at the stallion. The wild horse stood watching him, soaked and trembling, yet unmoving. There was intelligence in his gaze, something beyond instinct. Desperation. Hope. Trust. Jack had no medical training, but he knew horses. He'd been raised in the saddle, trained colts before he could tie his own boot. He didn't need a vet to tell him the mare needed warmth, shelter, and rest, or she wouldn't survive the night. He surveyed the area. Nothing but rocks and rain and wind. They wouldn't make it back to the cabin. Not in this storm, not with her in this condition. He scanned the terrain and remembered something, an old dry riverbed nearby, where cowboys once camped. There might still be a half-buried tarp or scraps of wood. He stood, rain dripping from his brow, and looked to the stallion. You want her saved? He asked quietly. Then help me. He didn't expect a response. But the stallion didn't run. Jack sprinted the short distance to the dry bed, scanning for anything useful. Luck, or fate, favored him tonight. A collapsed pack mule frame lay rotting against the rocks, and tangled in its remains was a length of frayed tarp. He yanked it free, tested the rope. It would hold, for now. Back at the mare's side, Jack worked quickly. He rolled the tarp out beneath her as gently as he could, murmuring soft reassurances as he moved her limbs into place. The stallion paced in tight circles, muscles coiled like springs, ears flicking constantly toward the wind. Easy, Jack muttered, tying the corners into a crude sled. Just hold on. He looped the rope around his shoulders and pulled. The weight nearly dropped him to his knees, but the mare shifted slightly, and that was enough. He gritted his teeth and leaned into it. Inches became feet. Feet became yards. The climb was brutal. Mud sucked at his boot. Rocks scraped his knees. Rain stung his eyes. But he kept going. The stallion flanked them the entire way, nudging the mare when she whimpered, snorting into the dark. Jack didn't speak. He didn't think. He just pulled. Eventually, the mouth of a shallow cave came into view. The roof barely high enough to crawl into, but it would block the worst of the wind. He dragged the mare inside, collapsed beside her, gasping. The stallion stood at the entrance, blocking the rain. A guardian. Jack checked her again. Still breathing, though weak. He peeled off his coat and draped it over her neck. His shirt followed. She shivered beneath the warmth. Come on, girl, he whispered. You've got more to live for. He sat beside her through the night, eyes heavy, muscles screaming, heart pounding with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: connection. The cave smelled of damp earth and horse sweat and rain. It smelled like life. Outside, the wind howled. Lightning danced on the canyon walls. And the stallion, still watching, let out a low, rumbling sound. Not a warning. A plea. Jack didn't sleep. Not because he couldn't, but because, for the first time in years, he didn't want to miss what came next. Morning broke slowly over the desert, gray and heavy, with mist curling between the canyon walls like breath from some sleeping beast. Jack stirred where he sat, his back stiff, muscles locked from the night's strain. He hadn't moved from the mare's side. Outside, the storm had calmed, reduced to a whisper of wind and the occasional patter of rain. The mare had survived the night. Barely. Her breathing was steadier now, but her eyes remained half-lidded, every rise and fall of her ribcage a labor of will. Jack brushed a hand gently across her flank, his fingers trembling. He could feel the tremor in her muscles, the tension of her body locked in a struggle between life and death. She was trying. God, she was trying. Beside him, the stallion stood like a statue, soaked to the bone, his coat flecked with mud and flecks of blood. He hadn't slept either. He watched Jack's every movement with cautious intensity, ears flicking at the slightest sound, nostrils flaring at each shallow gasp from the mare. There was no doubt now. This stallion wasn't just a wanderer. He was her mate. He had brought Jack here for her, and now he waited, daring the world to interfere. Jack leaned back against the cave wall, exhaling slowly. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, to Emily again. He remembered her kneeling in a field of wildflowers, hand outstretched to a trembling colt, speaking in soft tones that only animals seemed to understand. She used to say horses were born with wild hearts for a reason, that some creatures were meant to run free, and others were born to help them find the strength to do so. He hadn't believed her then. Not really. Not until now. The mare's legs twitched. A sudden sharp whinny escaped her, not loud but raw with pain. Jack tensed, crawling to her side again. The contractions had started. Too soon and yet too late. The foal was coming. He'd seen births before, plenty of them, but never under conditions like these. No medical tools. No warm barn. Just a tarp-covered floor, the chill of a dying storm, and hope held together by the thinnest thread. Her body arched, legs kicking weakly, as another contraction seized her. Jack reached out, his hands finding the curve of her belly. She fought, but there was no strength behind it. She couldn't do this alone. "It's okay," he whispered, voice steady despite the fear building in his chest. "You're not alone." The stallion paced again, the sound of his hooves echoing through the cave like a heartbeat. Jack focused on the mare. He could feel the shape of the foal, not moving. Too still. Panic clawed at him. If the foal didn't emerge soon, they'd lose them both. "I need you to push, girl," he said, tightening his grip on her side. "Come on. You've come this far." Another contraction hit. This time something changed. A hoof appeared, just one. Jack's blood turned cold. It was a breech birth. The foal was positioned wrong. Jack's heart pounded in his ears. He could walk away. Let nature take its course. But that wasn't who he was. Not anymore. With careful hands, he repositioned himself at the mare's rear. The single hoof glistened in the dim light, slick with fluid. He reached in, fingers searching, heart hammering. The other leg was caught behind. He gritted his teeth, easing it forward, inch by agonizing inch. The mare shrieked in pain, her body convulsing. The stallion reared with a furious scream, but he didn't charge. He didn't interfere. Jack didn't stop. Every second mattered. The second hoof slid free. He worked quickly now, guiding the small head, aligning the shoulders. The mare screamed again, louder, sharper. Her legs thrashed weakly against the tarp. And then, with one final contraction and a desperate cry, the foal slid out onto the ground in a slick, unmoving heap. Silence. Jack dropped to his knees, breath caught in his throat. The foal didn't move. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He cleared the mucus from the foal's nostrils with trembling hands, rubbed its chest, gently rocked its tiny frame. Nothing. The stallion stepped forward, eyes wild, nostrils flared. "Come on," Jack pleaded, pressing harder. "You're not done." "Not yet." He pounded the small chest once, twice, then, a tiny cough, a sharp, wet gasp. The foal moved. Jack laughed, a broken, exhausted sound that echoed off the cave walls like a prayer. The mare opened her eyes, struggling to lift her head. Jack turned the foal toward her, and with a low, strained nicker, she greeted her child. The stallion let out a sound Jack had never heard before. Relief. Joy. And Jack just sat there, soaked and shivering, watching life take root in the mud. The foal was a filly, pale, with a white blaze down her face. She tried to stand within minutes, legs wobbling and collapsing beneath her. But she tried again, and again. By midday, the sun finally broke through the storm clouds. Golden rays filtered into the cave, casting everything in a soft, warm glow. Jack stood and stepped outside, letting the sun warm his skin. The air was clean, heavy with petrichor and renewal. Behind him, the mare nursed her foal, eyes half closed. The stallion stood close, watching over them like a sentry. Jack turned and met his gaze again, something wordless passing between them. Respect. Gratitude. Understanding. He could leave now. His job was done. But as he turned to go, the filly let out a sharp whinny, small, high-pitched, but full of fire. Jack paused. The stallion didn't follow him. Instead, he walked to Jack and stopped just a few feet away, eyes locked onto his. Slowly, so slowly, he dipped his head. It wasn't submission. It wasn't fear. It was thanks. Jack blinked against the sudden sting in his eyes. He reached out, fingers brushing the stallion's muzzle. Warm. Alive. You're welcome, he said softly. Take care of them. He stepped away, turning back toward the trail that would lead him home. Each step was heavy. Not with regret, but with a strange new weight he didn't yet understand. As he reached the ridge, he looked back one final time. The 3 horses stood together in the sunlight, mare, stallion, and foal. A family. Jack continued down the slope, heart thudding with something unfamiliar. Not sadness. Not grief. Hope. He wasn't sure what waited at the cabin. Whether the silence would press in on him again, or if he'd find some way to break it. But something had changed in him, carved out in the mud and blood and storm. A spark had been reignited. He would return to the world. Not today. But soon. Because some wild hearts needed help to keep running. And maybe, just maybe, so did he. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Jack hadn't known he missed. Mornings came with the gold of rising sun spilling over red rock and sagebrush, and evenings closed with the soft cries of coyotes echoing under starlit skies. He found himself returning to the canyon more often than he cared to admit, drawn back not out of obligation, but by something deeper, something he couldn't name. The mare, whom he'd quietly started calling Lark, was healing. Her wounds had begun to scab, her eyes more alert now, watchful. She moved with care but no longer with pain. The foal, in contrast, was bursting with life. Jack had taken to calling her Ember, after the flicker of fire she seemed to carry in her steps. Each day she grew bolder, testing her legs, bounding in unpredictable circles around her mother. Her coat was beginning to dry into a soft champagne, with dark, delicate points along her ears and legs. She was striking, too beautiful to belong to anything but the wild. And the stallion? He remained unnamed, as if the act of giving him one would diminish the power he seemed to carry. Jack had never seen such intelligence in a horse. The way the stallion watched over his family, the way he followed Jack with those unreadable eyes. He wasn't just protecting them. He was measuring Jack, weighing something deep within the man, as though he knew there was more at stake than survival. Jack didn't approach too closely anymore. He knew better than to assume the family was his to care for. But every day he brought supplies. Salt blocks, a few flakes of alfalfa, clean water in jugs slung over his shoulders. He left them quietly, then backed away, giving space. It had become a routine, one that grounded him. Until the morning he arrived and found the canyon silent. No mare. No foal. No stallion. Just wind brushing through dry grass and the echo of his own breath. Jack's gut tightened. He scanned the area for tracks, for broken brush, for signs of distress. There were hoof prints, fresh, but they led not deeper into the canyon, but away from it. Fast. Panicked. Something had spooked them. He dropped to one knee, running his fingers through the dirt. Deep impressions. Running. Not grazing. Fleeing. A chill swept through him. He rose and followed the trail. It didn't take long to find the first sign of danger. Just beyond the far ridge, where the canyon gave way to a dry wash, he spotted tire tracks, thick, deep grooves in the earth, too wide for a rancher's truck. These were trailers. Several. Too many. Jack followed the tracks with growing dread. He knew this pattern. Wranglers. Not the kind that worked for ranches. The kind that worked in the shadows, rounding up wild Mustangs and selling them for slaughter across the border. It was illegal, brutal, and despite years of effort to stop them, the trade still thrived in places too remote for regulation. He broke into a jog, heart pounding in his chest. He didn't call out. It would only drive them further away if they were still near. And if they weren't, he didn't want to alert anyone else. 2 miles out, he found the first sign of struggle. A patch of blood in the dirt. Tufts of sorrel hair. A boot print. His throat tightened. He dropped beside the spot, examining it closely. Lark had fought. He could see her hoof marks, scattered and erratic. Ember's prints were there too, smaller, more frantic. And then, they vanished. Jack stood, jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. They were taken. Not just the mare and foal, likely the stallion too. All three, ripped from the wild by men who saw only dollar signs. Fury flared in his chest, hot and reckless, but beneath it was something colder. Determination. He had failed once before. Emily. He hadn't been fast enough, hadn't seen the signs early enough to stop the chaos that took her. But this time, he would not fail. He turned back toward the cabin. By nightfall, he had packed everything he might need. His old saddlebag, long and used, now filled with maps, rope, a flashlight, spare clothes. In the back of the shed, covered in a decade of dust, was a weathered rifle. He hesitated before taking it. He hoped to never use it. But hope, he knew, was not enough in the world they lived in. He saddled up his old quarter horse, Rusty, who snorted in protest at the sudden return to duty but obeyed all the same. Jack stroked the horse's neck gently. "I need one more ride out of you," he said, voice low. "For them." They rode through the darkness, moonlight their only guide. Jack followed the tire tracks, which twisted east, toward the flatlands where fences marked the edge of old, unused grazing lands. It was where the wranglers liked to work, far enough from town to go unnoticed, but close enough to highways to move quickly. By dawn, he spotted smoke curling above a distant bluff. A camp. Jack slowed Rusty to a crawl, tying him to a juniper out of sight. Then, on foot, he crept closer. What he saw twisted his stomach into knots. There were 4 trucks, 2 long trailers. A crude corral made of metal panels. Inside it, dozens of horses. Some pacing nervously, others frozen with wide, terrified eyes. Among them, he spotted her. Lark. Thin. Mud-streaked. A deep gash across her flank. She stood protectively in front of Ember, who huddled beneath her, legs folded under her body. The foal wasn't moving. Panic clutched at his chest. Then he saw the stallion. He was separated from them, tied harshly to a post outside the corral. His mouth was bloody where he'd fought the bit, his sides lathered with sweat and dust. But his eyes, those burning, defiant eyes, still held fire. Jack ducked back behind the rocks. There were 3 men at the camp. One by the fire, another sleeping in the truck, and the third walking the perimeter lazily with a rifle slung over his shoulder. They were cocky, confident, the kind of men who believed the desert made them invincible. They were wrong. Jack waited until the man by the fire stepped away to check a water trough. Then he moved. Silent, swift. He reached the stallion first. The horse froze, nostrils flaring. Jack raised his hands. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm here to help." He cut the rope with his knife. The stallion pulled back, wild and unsure. But then, he didn't run. He followed. Together, they circled behind the corral. Jack worked quickly, cutting the zip ties holding the panels together. It was crude but effective. The moment the last one snapped, the panel shifted just enough. Lark noticed first. Her ears perked. She nudged Ember. The foal stirred. Still alive. Hope surged. Jack whistled low and sharp. Lark bolted. The chaos erupted instantly. Screams from the camp, the sound of men grabbing weapons, horses stampeding through the gap. Dust filled the air. The stallion charged into the fray. Jack didn't stay to watch. He grabbed Ember in his arms, awkward, heavy, but manageable, and ran. He heard gunfire behind him. The crack of boots over gravel. But the stallion was there. A thunderous blur of muscle and fury. He slammed into one of the men, sent him sprawling. Jack didn't stop. He made it to Rusty and slung Ember over the saddle, climbed up behind her, heart hammering in his chest. Lark was already galloping ahead, leading the others. They didn't look back. They didn't have to. They were free, for now. As the dust settled and the canyon swallowed them once more, Jack didn't feel triumph. He felt a promise begin to form. They had come to him for help. Now he would give them more than just survival. He would give them a future. The morning dawned slowly, as though the sun itself was reluctant to pierce the silence left behind by the storm. The desert, once raw and defiant in the thrashing rain, now glistened under a fragile peace. Jack crouched near the mare, brushing his palm gently along her neck. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and that small miracle breathed renewed strength into his exhausted limbs. The Mustang stood close, head lowered, his body alert. There was something in the stallion's gaze, an unspoken understanding, almost human in its clarity, that told Jack the animal was still waiting. Not just watching over his mate, but waiting for something more. The mare stirred, shifting with effort. Jack leaned forward, helping her gently adjust her weight. She had made it through the night. That alone was victory. But it wasn't over. He could feel it, a tension in the air, something beyond survival, some force that lingered just outside the circle of light cast by the rising sun. His hand lingered on the mare's side, and he felt it then, a twitch, then a stronger ripple. The foal. Still alive, still moving. A tiny life trying to press forward even as its mother lay fragile on the threshold between hope and ruin. Jack stood, brushing the dirt from his jeans, eyes narrowing as he scanned the ridge above the alcove. He'd heard something, too rhythmic for the wind, too deliberate for birdsong. The stallion shifted too, ears pricking sharply forward. They weren't alone. Jack's heart stuttered with dread. A movement flashed at the crest of the hill, too fast, too precise. Men. He didn't need more than a glimpse to know. They weren't ranchers or hikers. These were men like the ones he used to know, ruthless, calculating, and always armed with more greed than empathy. He ducked quickly, moving to cover the mare's form with the tarp as best he could. The stallion stayed still, every muscle tight with tension, eyes fixed on the figures descending. Jack swore under his breath. There was no doubt why they were here. The wild horses. Rumors had circulated for months that this band of Mustangs, especially the stallion, were being targeted by traffickers looking to sell them off. Pure bloodlines. High value. No law in these hills strong enough to stop them. And now the stallion had led them straight to his mate, straight to Jack. A voice rang out, clear and cold. "Step back from the horse, old man." Jack turned slowly, raising his hands to show he carried no weapon. His mind raced. 4 of them. One holding a rope, another with a rifle slung across his back. Jack's heart pounded against his ribs as he measured the odds. They didn't see the mare's condition, not yet. They only saw the stallion and a man standing in their way. Jack squared his shoulders, forcing calm into his voice. "She's injured. She won't survive being moved." "She ain't your concern," one of them spat, stepping forward. "Neither of them are." The stallion let out a sharp cry, stepping between Jack and the strangers, nostrils flared, teeth bared. His body became a wall, unyielding, proud, and fully aware of the danger. The moment held like a taut wire. Jack knew that if he didn't say something, if he didn't act, they'd take them. Or worse. "She's pregnant," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "You move her now and you kill her. You kill the foal." That gave them pause. The leader, a lean man with a cruel jaw and a long scar across one cheek, tilted his head, studying Jack. "Then she's a liability," he said coldly. "Not worth the trouble." Jack took a step forward, placing himself more deliberately between the men and the horses. "You don't get to decide that." The man's hand twitched toward the rifle. "You want to die for a horse?" "No," Jack replied, steady. "But I already died once. This," He gestured to the mare and the stallion. "This is why I came back." A silence stretched, thick with threat. Then, from behind the men, a new sound echoed, hoofbeat. Dozens. The ridge beyond shimmered with motion. From the horizon came a sight that struck breath from every chest, a herd. Wild, untamed, and magnificent. Mares, colts, and stallions surged across the hills like living thunder. Jack recognized them instantly, the rest of the band. The Mustang's family. They had come. The poachers hesitated. Fear flickered in their eyes as the herd surrounded the ridge in a wide arc, powerful bodies kicking dust and defiance into the morning air. The lead stallion lifted his head and released a sound so fierce and mournful that it shook the very earth. It wasn't a battle cry, it was a call. And behind Jack, the injured mare tried to rise. Jack turned just in time to catch her. She leaned against him, trembling but determined. The foal within her stirred again, as if moved by the power of the herd's return. The stallion stepped forward and pressed his muzzle against her neck. In that moment, the bond between them shone like fire in the dawn. They would not leave each other. They would not surrender. The poachers backed away, uncertain now, surrounded and unarmed in the face of something far greater than profit. The leader sneered, but even he understood the shifting tide. "This ain't over," he muttered before signaling his men to retreat. Jack watched them disappear into the scrub, the stallion's eyes tracking them until they were gone. Then, slowly, the herd began to close in, not aggressively, but with a protective grace. They moved around the mare, around Jack, forming a living shield of flesh and spirit. Jack felt tears sting his eyes, not from fear or pain, but from awe. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something again. Not just a man alone with ghosts, but someone needed, chosen. The mare finally rose to her feet, swaying but standing. Jack held her gently, supporting her weight as she leaned into her mate. The stallion nickered softly, nuzzling her, then glanced at Jack with an expression that needed no translation. Gratitude. Trust. Over the next hour, Jack helped clear a path through the wet stone and brush, working with the stallion guiding him, always close, always vigilant. The herd moved in quiet reverence, and Jack followed their rhythm, letting them show him the way. They moved slowly down from the ridge, toward a valley Jack had only heard about in whispers. Hidden, lush, and safe. When they reached the hollow, sunlight bathed the trees in gold. A stream trickled through the tall grass, and the air smelled sweet, untouched. The mare collapsed into the soft earth, surrounded by the herd. Jack stepped back, giving space, yet unwilling to leave. He found a rock to sit on and waited, heart pounding as the herd circled in silence. The birth came just before noon. Jack watched in quiet awe as the foal emerged, slick and trembling, the very embodiment of resilience. The mare nuzzled her newborn, and the stallion stood over them like a sentinel. Life, fragile and ferocious, had won again. Jack felt something crack inside him, not break, but release. A weight he had carried for years slipped from his shoulders. He realized now that he hadn't just saved them, they had saved him, too. They reminded him what it meant to fight for something pure, to believe in redemption, no matter how lost the path had seemed. The stallion approached once more, lowering his head until his eyes met Jack's. There was a moment, brief but eternal, where man and horse existed without barrier. Jack lifted a hand, and the stallion pressed his muzzle against it, breathing deeply.